I was absolutely floored when I heard this album all the way through. Hey everyone, doing something a little different today. Kind of wanted to shake it up, change things up a little bit. I really wanted to start sort of ranking out albums from bands and artists that I really like, and I figured there's no better place to start than Linkin Park. They're my favorite band of all time. They are literally the reason why I started making music in the first place. So I figured it only makes sense to start with their discography. Plus, I'll be seeing them live in a couple of weeks. So I figured why not take some time to sort of look back on their huge discography and sort of have the hardest time of my life trying to decide which albums I like most. This is going to be a really rough one to make, but I figured it's the best place to start. I will not be doing anything from Mike Shinoda's solo projects or anything the other guys have done. I'm just going to be doing Linkin Park, so maybe I can do something like that in the future. But for now, we're just going to be focusing the main albums along with Reanimation and Recharged for reasons that I'll disclose later on in the video. We're going to start with Hybrid Theory from 2000. This album is not what started it for me. I actually started listening to them with Meteora because, I think I would have been too young to really understand any sort of musical passages when Hybrid Theory came out. Nonetheless, this album was very influential. It really shook up the entire nu metal community and sort of established a new standard for that genre as a whole and put Linkin Park on the map. And it was kind of their I don't want to say their breakthrough success because of Zero and because of Hybrid Theory, the band name, and the band's history before this album, but this is the album that put them on the map and gave us songs like One Step Closer, In the End, Points of Authority, you name it. Every song on this album front to back slaps. Yeah, every song on this album, start to finish, is an experience. I would personally say that with all of their albums. I love all of them. So again, like I said in the beginning, this is going to be a very hard tier list to make. But if I had to put Hybrid Theory anywhere, I would put it under really good. The reason why I'm putting it here is because it is really, really, really good for a debut album. But in my opinion, they do have better to offer. This is still one of the best albums ever made, in my personal opinion. I do feel like they have achieved better since from a musical standpoint, from a musical quality standpoint, but this album will stand the test of time and it is considered a classic. So I'm putting it here under really good. Next, we have Reanimation from 2002. Reanimation kind of defined what they were trying to have remixes of pretty much every song on Hybrid Theory, but from different artists and sometimes different bands. Sometimes the band members themselves, like Mike Shinoda and Joe Hahn, would remix some of the songs themselves and feature other artists doing vocals on the song as well. There's a reworked version of Crawling on here that features Aaron Lewis from Stained. There is a version of One Step Closer on here featuring Jonathan Davis from Korn. Most do not consider this to be an actual album. I do because of the amount of effort that was put into making it. It felt like the band was trying to breathe new energy into these songs, keeping them relevant a couple years later, because this came out 2 years after Hybrid Theory. At this point, they had already toured probably a decent amount for Hybrid Theory and wanted to kind of show how these songs could sound different if someone else had a hand in making it or remixing it. It was also, and I could be wrong, but this was also one of the first like mainstream remix albums where a band took their debut and sort of just had other people sculpt it or help them kind of make something new out of it. And that's why I'm putting it on this list. I think it originally wasn't on this tier list, but I put it on here because I really like it. It's an interesting entry into their discography, and I've even met people who got into their music from Reanimation. I'm going to put it under good, and the reason why I'm putting it under good is because it was very influential, but when it comes to quality, there are other albums in their discography that are better than this and that I would personally recommend to people more than this if you were getting into the band for the first time. To some, it's not even really considered an album. I'm just putting it on here because I love it, so I would put it under the good. I'd put it right smack in the middle. Next, we have Meteora from 2003. This album was kind of a test for the band to sort of prove themselves in a way, because normally what happens sometimes, at least back then, is a band or an artist would come out with their first album and sometimes their second album would succeed, other times it would flop. This was kind of Linkin Park's moment to really show what they could do outside of the sound of Hybrid Theory and where they could take their sound going forward. A lot of the fan base considers this album to be a darker, more mature version of Hybrid Theory, and I would agree with that. I think that songs like Numb, or if you took songs like Crawling and made it darker and mature, gave it better songwriting, gave it more atmosphere. That is definitely what this album embodies. You also have songs like Don't Stay and Somewhere I Belong, where the band is trying different tuning styles. They're trying out tunings like drop B and drop C sharp, and that proved to give the songs a darker tonality overall. The themes lyrically on this album are also more pronounced and a little less abstract than they were on Hybrid Theory. There's also a lot of fan favorites on this album, like the instrumental track Session and Nobody's Listening. And we also see the band kind of shifting direction a couple of times. There's a lot more pop influence and there's a lot more electronic influence on this album, seen in songs like Numb, Lying for You, From the Inside, and Breaking the Habit. You also have some of the band's heavier material like Hit the Floor on this album as well. Overall, it's probably one of their strongest albums. I would consider it to be one of their strongest albums because of how it shows the band in a very mature light while they're also recording very heavy material lyrically and instrumentally, and also branching out into more pop alternative rock territories. I would put Meteora in the lane of the best. Do I think it's their best album? Close, but not quite. We'll touch more on that later. But for now, I'm putting it in that lane because I do think it is one of their best albums. So it's going to stay there for a while, and we're going to move stuff around later. Moving on to 2007's Minutes to Midnight. This was the first time that Linkin Park fans and listeners of the band at the time were polarized, because this is when they started branching into more alternative rock, more guitar heavy material, leaned a little less on rapping and hip hop influence, started knocking out hits like What I've Done and Bleed It Out. I personally felt like this album was a really nice experiment, and it had a very nice air to it for its time. You can hear the influence that Chester brought to the table from his other band Dead by Sunrise, and you could also hear the influence of Mike Shinoda and Rick Rubin's production on this album quite well. I think their collaboration with Rick on this album really pushed them to try out new sounds that they wouldn't have tried back in the Meteora and Hybrid Theory days. There is also some Linkin Park underground demos that show Linkin Park going into some of this new alternative rock, more atmospheric, less heavy territory. I would say front to back, just like Hybrid Theory and just like Meteora, this album has no skips. It's really good all the way through. There's a couple of songs that are different, like In Pieces and In Between. Both of those songs right after each other kind of stick out a little bit, but they show you a different angle that the band was trying to achieve at that time. There's also some fan favorites on here like Hands Held High, No More Sorrow, and The Little Things Give You Away that I think still give this album a lot of relevance with the fan base. And me personally, I would consider that a win, regardless of the criticism that the band faced at the time. I would put Minutes to Midnight in the really good column, right under Hybrid Theory. Again, this is so hard to make because I love all these albums pretty much equally. I like them for all their strengths and weaknesses. This is going to be a tough one for sure. But for now, I'm just putting it in the really good lane, right under Hybrid Theory, and I think I'm okay with that. Next, we're going to talk about probably the most controversial album in Linkin Park's discography, and that was 2010's A Thousand Suns. I personally loved this album when it came out. I loved the singles, even though they did sound strange and weird at the time. I think they've aged really well. Some of the fan base didn't feel that way at the time, and that's okay. Everyone's got their own taste. It divided people in the sense that some people wanted those angsty rock anthems from the first three albums, and they also didn't quite understand the concept of what this album meant and what the band was going for. And the band was trying out all kinds of new things with this album. There was a lot more electronica. There was a lot more world sounds being used in it. There's a lot more sampling happening. Even the guitars kind of take a back seat on, I would say, a good 50% of this album, maybe even leaning towards 55 or 60%. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, in my opinion. I personally felt even back then, I mean, I was really young when I was listening to this. I was barely learning guitar. I was barely playing instruments. I didn't really know a lot about how music was made, but I know that the way that the music made me feel from this album at that time, I knew that it was really powerful music. And I knew that the meaning behind these songs and the themes that they were presenting, like humanity suffering, nuclear warfare. There's a lot of even more abstract concepts than that are presented on this album. Even when I was listening to it back then, I still felt the deeper emotions that were behind some of these songs. So to me, it didn't really feel like that much of a change from the first three albums. To me, it felt different. It felt like I was listening to a new Linkin Park album, but it didn't feel like I was missing those heavy themes that are still set from those first three albums. really strong singles like The Catalyst and Waiting for the End. And it also had ones that showed some of the weirder stuff on the album, like Burning in the Sky and Iridescent. But we also got a lot of fan favorites from this, like Robot Boy, Blackout, and When They Come For Me. I think some of the criticism with this album came with a lot of the interludes that are tracks in this album and the strange layout of the album. But either way, I still think this is a really good album, and I think it actually holds up and has aged better than some of their other albums. And I'm going to put it up here in the best category. The reason why it's below Meteora is because I feel like Meteora has more to relate to in it. The songs feel a bit more structured for pop sensibility and for fans of rock and metal music, whereas 1,000 Suns is a bit more abstract, but it's worth the musical journey that you'll go through when listening to it. I would say from a musical quality standpoint, it is one of their strongest. Still is not Linkin Park at their best, so I'm putting it right below Meteora. As we go on, this is just getting harder and harder and harder. 2012's Living Things. This album was in a way considered by the fan base to be kind of a return to form for the band. They were still chasing something different than what we've heard before, but it was a more accepted kind of different. It was back to that more pop sensible sound that they were known for bringing to alternative metal and nu metal. But instead, what we got is what I think is one of their best albums, and I often consider it their best album. Living Things, from start to finish, is a very atmosphere heavy pop rock meets electronic rock meets nu metal sometimes meets all kinds of the sounds that Linkin Park has given us up until this point put into one album. This album at the time, and I understand it more now, but people would often say it's if you took Meteora and 1,000 Suns and just squished them together, and I completely agree with that. I think that this album has a lot of experimentation on it, but it's packaged in a way that your average listener could get behind it better and could understand what the song is about, probably a little better, like on songs like Castle of Glass or Burn It Down or even Lost in the Echo. There's a lot of sound design on this album. I think this was around a time in music where we were hearing a lot of more electronica and a lot of electronic influences in pop music, and dubstep was starting to hit peak popularity as well. So there was a lot of those kinds of noises. There was a lot of playing around with synthesizers as the main instrument on this album, but there were still heavy guitars, like on the song Victimized. And that made fans and myself feel like, okay, they still have their edge. They can still make songs that slap like that. They can still do breakdowns, and they can still present the heavier screaming vocals in a way that evolves with the band's sound and where they want to take it. If I had to pick an album out of Linkin Park's whole discography that would belong at the top, it would be Living Things. And my reason for that is I personally resonate with the songs on this album the most. I always come back to this album. And it was released at a time in my life where I was listening to a lot of music, and this is actually when I started producing music and I started getting into working with software and understanding how songs worked. So having a fresh set of Linkin Park songs to analyze and to learn from at the time just really resonated with what I had going on. And the overall aesthetic of the album with all the textures and with all the atmospheres really did a lot for me, and I just still feel like this was Linkin Park at their peak. Just for me personally, it is my personal favorite album from them. Some side bits: I feel like Until It Breaks, Tinfoil, Skin to Bone, and I'll Be Gone are if Linkin Park took the sound from 1,000 Suns and just polished it pretty much perfectly and made the song ideas less abstract, but still have a little bit of that experimentation in them. Also, the song Powerless is a very powerful closer to the album, and I think it was also one of the singles, if I'm not mistaken. Before we move on to the next actual album that Linkin Park put out in 2014, we're going to talk about Recharged. Recharged was essentially a remix album similar to Reanimation, but featuring a lot of newer EDM artists like Dat Sick, Kill Sonic, and a few others of note that I'll pop up on the screen right now. This album was cool. It wasn't my favorite, but it did feature a single with Steve Aoki called The Light That Never Comes, which I think is one of their catchiest songs, and it was also kind of Linkin Park's entry into trying out more mainstream top 40 pop music. Overall, I thought it was a great way to sort of experiment with some of these other artists and producers and sort of get that more EDM sound on some of these songs without just converting Linkin Park's whole sound to dubstep, drum and bass, and electro house. It's not as good as Reanimation, but I can still go back and listen to these remixes and think, yeah, that was definitely the early 2010s and it fit for that time period. Moving on to the next album, The Hunting Party from 2014. This album was seen as a return to rock, according to some people at the time. I personally feel like Linkin Park has never left that part of their sound and their DNA out of their music entirely. I do think they went very rock heavy on this album. Mike Shinoda or Brad Delson said something to the effect of, we were trying to make a prequel to Linkin Park on this album. So they were listening to a lot of Helmet. They were listening to a lot of things that got them into the music that they make, while also still trying to make what a more adult heavy album would sound like, or a more mature heavy album would sound like. I think the vision was definitely translated. It is not my favorite Linkin Park album. I do appreciate a lot of the songs that are on here. My personal favorites from this album are Keys to the Kingdom and Mark the Graves. I think Mark the Graves is one of Linkin Park's best songs ever, and it's completely underrated, and it just is it makes you feel a certain way. It's a very beautiful song. There's also some other fan favorites on here that I think were also singles, like Until It's Gone and Wastelands. You also have Guilty All the Same featuring Rakim. This album just has a very weird air to me for some reason, and I don't know what it is. It's not that I don't like the album. I would just consider it probably the least Linkin Park of an album, just for me personally. And I don't know why that is. I think there's probably just not enough genre blending and fusing happening on this album. It feels like a very rock heavy album, and that's what the guys were going for. So I would personally put this at the top of good. And my reasoning for that is I do come to this album the least out of all of their albums. I do think it's a good sound, and sometimes when I'm feeling something a little different, I'll listen to it, especially Keys to the Kingdom. I think that's one of the best album openers I've ever heard. Has this album aged good? Yeah, I would say so. Me personally, since I listen for very nice sounding production personally, I feel like some of the mixing on this kind of leaves a little to be desired. And it's not bad by any means. I've just listened to it the least when it comes to Linkin Park's discography. So for one of their main albums, I would put it in the good pile, because it's still good, you know. And some people really do appreciate what they did on this album, going back to their rock roots. It's just not for me 100% of the time. So I'd put it a little lower on the totem pole. Next, we have the 2017 album One More Light, which was Linkin Park's last album with Chester Bennington. I personally feel like this album was a very beautiful album, and I still enjoy the songs on it to this day. I think that Linkin Park took a huge risk going for songwriting heavy, very structure heavy songs on this album. It was met with a lot of negative reception at the time, but when you really listen to these songs and you really dissect what's in them, there's a lot of guitar layers. There's a lot of Linkin Park's core roots in a lot of these songs, especially on Good Goodbye, Invisible, and Nobody Can Save Me. If you took these songs and just gave them distorted guitars, they would sound like they belong on Meteora or even Living Things. I think stripping that back and really letting the lyrics and the chord progression choices and a lot of the core what makes a song elements really come out on this album was a bold move, and it did translate well. I think Heavy is a beautiful song. I think really all 10 of these, now that I'm looking at the track list, are songs that I do go back and listen to when I want Linkin Park, but I also just don't want something that's super aggressive and super heavy. I want more like easy listening Linkin Park, if that makes any sense. I think too, I've also taken some time to look at the stems from this album and some of the songs on this album. You can hear a lot of intricate guitar work, and I believe Brad himself has mentioned that there are a lot of guitars on the album. They're just more tucked into the background of the mix. They're not at the forefront. And I think there's something to be said and sort of learned from with that. Sometimes you can get the idea of a song across without having to just shove it into the listener's face. And I think that is definitely achieved on One More Light. I think when it comes to describing what is heavy music, I feel like on One More Light is a very emotionally heavy album. If you listen to it lyrically, I think there's a lot to be said about that. If I were to rank this album, I would put it at the bottom of really good, because I like it better than The Hunting Party, but I like the rest of their catalog just a little bit more than One More Light. But again, it is a situational album that I come back to every now and then just for some variety, you know? And I think at the end of the day, that's what Linkin Park's music is about, is variety. In between One More Light and then the album I'm going to talk about next, there was a big moment of uncertainty for the Linkin Park fan base. There was also a lot of solo stuff from Mike, and there was a lot of sort of mystery in the air of what we were going to get next. That leads us all the way to 2024 and 2025's newest album from Linkin Park, From Zero, is the first album to feature Colin on drums and Emily on vocals. I was absolutely floored when I heard this album. all the way through. I think what Linkin Park did on this album is they took some of the core sounds from their entire discography and just put it into an album that also has its own sound at the same time. If we were doing this tier list in the future and looking back on this album, I would say that From Zero has its own sound to it. It has the roots of Hybrid Theory, but it also has some of the darker, more mature elements of Meteora heard in songs like Over Each Other, as well as Casualty. Then you also hear electronic textures and experimentation like what we heard on A Thousand Suns and Living Things, especially in the songs Overflow, as well as Good Things Go. And then they haven't lost their pop sensibility and touch like what we heard on One More Light that can be heard on songs like Stained. And then every Linkin Park fan knows that Two-Faced is literally a callback to One Step Closer, very tastefully done. I would say this album is great, not just for the throwbacks it gives, but it also shows where the band can take their sound going forward. I feel like songs like Up From the Bottom and Cut the Bridge show this the most. It shows that Emily and Colin as musicians are very versatile. It also shows that the rest of the guys in the band haven't lost their touch, and Mike Shinoda's production really shines through on this album. I'm personally so excited to see some of these new songs live as well as some of the classics. Literally looking at this album, I'm literally trying to imagine what some of them will sound like. I haven't looked at any videos. I've been very good. If I had to rank this album, I would say this is tough. I think this tier list was a bad idea because this is really tough. I would right under Meteora and above A Thousand Suns because nothing beats some of the classics, and also nothing beats what I personally consider to be my top Linkin Park album of all time. But at the same time, some of the songs on this album I keep coming back to, and I can't tell if it's because it's new and exciting and it's different, or if these are some of their best works to date, and I am so excited for the future. That would probably be how I would end up ranking all these albums. Again, if I really have more time to really sit here and debate over it, I would move things around. I even thought about doing like different criteria, like how good were the singles and how good were the fan favorites and how cool is the album artwork. But I think at the end of the day, music's subjective. This is just how I personally feel about some of these albums. I really want to do more of these because they're fun. I like thinking what album do I like most and why. So if you have any recommendations or you have any other artists or bands that you want to see an album ranking for, please feel free to put them in the comments and I'll definitely check that out. Other than that, thanks for stopping by and I'll see you guys next time.